So do Marianne and Leonard Words of Love.
This is our first documentary. Is it?
Yeah,
yes.
One of several.
One of several this week. Let's do it.
The title refers to, of course, Leonard Cohen and Marianne Ihlen, and she's the woman who inspired one of his most famous songs, So Long, Marianne. And it opens with the letter that he famously sent her as she was dying that starts with, Dearest Marianne, I'm just a little behind you. And she died in July 2016, and then he died 3 months later. And I remember at the time, the letter was being circulated and everyone was going, oh, this is such a romantic, poetic tragedy. And so that's what I was hoping to see in this documentary. And I feel like that's not what I got. And so to give a quick background, the pair first met on the Greek island of Hydra in 1960, which was a hub for wealthy bohemians. There were lots of painters, artists, writers, intellectuals. They were instantly attracted, move in, got into a little routine. Leonard at the time was not a musician. He was a very frustrated writer. And so he'd be hunched over the typewriter each day and she'd come and bring him little sandwiches. And there's an old recording of her in the documentary where she describes herself as his Greek muse who sat at his feet. But eventually Leonard got very frustrated, moved to New York, leaving Marianne behind. And that's when he discovered the folk scene. And he played Suzanne to Judy Collins and she said, oh, we have to record this. That became a hit. Then he became famous. And I guess we know the rest of the story. And at this juncture in the documentary, that's when we really start to leave Marianne behind and it just becomes a Leonard Cohen documentary. And it goes through, you know, all the obvious bits and pieces like his work with Phil Spector and even his stay at a monastery in the 1990s. And all this time, Marianne's just being left behind. At first, he'd see her 6 months out of every year and then less and less and less. She even moved to New York to be with him, but she was just kind of left abandoned while he went out and lived this rock star lifestyle. And so it's very frustrating to watch because you don't really get to the heart of the story, which is what this relationship meant, what it represented. And there is this interesting stuff about the free love movement of the 1960s that there are suggestions that maybe people didn't really know what they were getting into. And the island of Hydra especially is described as this beautiful but intoxicating place where inhibitions were left at the door, and it caused what one former resident of the island described as irreparable damage to families, and children were neglected. Some of their drinks were even spiked. And there's a very brief mention that Marianne's son Axel spent most of his life in psychiatric hospitals. And so you're sort of nearly getting into the meat of the subject, the heart of the subject, but it never really commits to that idea. And I think it's because this documentary, which is by Nick Broomfield, has a bit too much of a personal connection to the stories. You can't even get 5 minutes in the documentary without him mentioning that they were once former lovers. And that comes up a lot. And you can hear it.
Sorry, who?
Nick Broomfield.
Nick and Marianne.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry, Nick and Marianne.
Ah.
Yeah, so you hear it in this clip. He tends to mention it a lot.
Okay.
I was mesmerized by the island's beauty and had never before met so many golden, sun-kissed people of either sex having so much fun together. It felt like anything was possible. Marianne gave me my first acid trip, which she said had come from a friend of Leonard's in London called Malcolm, and she took these pictures of me the morning after. I had no intention of leaving, but then one of Marianne's other lovers unexpectedly showed up on the island, and I found myself hastily boarding the next boat back to Athens.
So he does that a lot. And this is kind of a Nick Broomfield thing because he loves to insert himself into his own documentaries. He even did it with 1998's Kurt and Courtney, which is a little bit infamous. But I think the real problem here is that because he has that personal involvement, it's really hard to keep that distance from the subject. And so he still sees Marianne as this like beautiful, ethereal muse. Floating around the place. Yeah, and he keeps reusing the same footage of her that was shot in the 1960s by D.A. Penbaker, which is her sort of in Hydra with her the wind flowing in her hair, and it's all beautiful and sun-kissed. And it never really goes beyond that idea of her as the muse, which I don't think being a muse constitutes an entire personality. And that there's more to the story there, but it's really disheartening to see that when you see the way that Leonard Cohen is treated, which is as such a, poet and an artist and this incredible, respectful figure. And obviously, because Nick Broomfield loves Leonard Cohen, it's such an adulatory portrait of him. And I think if you're going to call something Marianne and Leonard and give those names equal weight, I think you really have to give those two people equal weight in the documentary.
Whereas it's actually Leonard and a bit of Marianne.
Yeah, Leonard, and occasionally we'll check back and see what Marianne's doing.
The subtitle.